Every day, aspiring musicians dream of getting out of their garages and taking their songs on the road for the world to hear. But not everyone's successful at making a living as a gigging musician. There's a right way and a wrong way to navigate the music business, and whether you're looking to book your first gig or plotting an extensive world tour, this show will help you demystify the live music industry by providing first-hand insights from artists and professionals who are doing it at the highest levels. Hey there, I'm Tony Neely, and this is the Book Your Band Podcast.
Welcome to the Book Your Band Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Tony Neely, and with me today is singer, songwriter, poet, entrepreneur, Derek Webb.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for being here. When I first came up with the idea of doing this show, I was listening to an online training and it said, take out a sheet of paper, write down your 5 dream guests who you'd like to have come on. And the very first name I wrote down was Derek Webb.
Dude.
And so...
Well, now you have to dream bigger dreams, I guess. Who was your number 2?
Trey Anastasio from Fish.
Oh, that's...
So
wow.
you beat out Trey.
Well, I'm probably a little easier to get a hold of.
Yeah, probably so. But also, like,
crazy,
because you've had your hand in so many different parts of the live music industry. And I thought it'd be really neat to talk to you because obviously you're on lots of podcasts talking about songwriting and talking about theology and things like that. I hadn't really heard many podcasts where you actually sat down and talked about your role in the live music industry.
Yeah.
And so
I love talking about that stuff.
And I'm so glad, and let alone 12-year-old me's head is exploding knowing that you're about to play a show in my living room as well. So
it's like it's your birthday. It's like it's both of our birthdays.
Right. Absolutely. Over the last probably 8 to 10 years, you've really switched from playing a lot of traditional music venues to focusing more so on house shows.
Yes.
What have you seen come about in your career having made that switch?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what's interesting is I actually played a bunch of house shows my very first year of my solo career in the early 2000s when I was putting my first record out. But it was more of a move of desperation because something had gone wrong, and the booking agency I was with, which were great, they were amazing, but somehow the ball got dropped. And this whole tour I was supposed to have with a band and this whole thing when my first record was coming out, it didn't happen. And we realized so late that it was too late to try to put something like that logistically top heavy back together again. And so I had to punt and do something because I didn't want to. My work ethic would not allow for me to be home the few weeks around when a record was coming out. That's just, Caedmon's, we would tour, we'd be out for months and months around a record release. We killed ourselves when records were coming out. We'd play 3 or 4 performances per day for 2 straight weeks just to make sure that we were in front of as many people as possible, And so I was just determined to do something. And the only thing that I could come up with that felt like something I could actually pull off was, well, what if I did house shows? What if we just kind of put a thing out on the internet, which at that time was a much younger version of what it is today, and just kind of said, okay, like very last minute, can anybody host me for a show? And so I did play a bunch of house shows, but kind of like the ones I do still, some were hosted in houses and some were hosted in churches and some were hosted in bars and some were hosted in, whatever. It's whatever spaces folks had access to that they could facilitate it. And I loved it, actually. And I learned a lot about what's great about it during that first year. Because it's an absolute bullseye in terms of the intimacy and the communication that you hope to have, and breaking down the kind of performer and audience convention that happens when you walk into a dark club or something, and there's lights and there's PA and there's darkness and you're lower down and you're quieter and you can't see you, and it's like you don't feel like you're part of it. Yeah, and you're not supposed to be. It's a monologue. It's a rhetorical thing that's happening. Other than you're clapping, we don't really want to hear from you except unless you're buying drinks. And I loved that it was like in a bright room where I could make as much noise as anybody else in the room can, and anyone could interrupt at any time and ask a question or stir a mutiny. Like anything could happen. And I love improvising under any circumstances. So it was great. Like I super enjoyed it. And then I didn't do it for a long time, but I never forgot that. And then, yeah, like a handful of years ago, I had an experience where I'm trying to determine if I'm going to take the time to tell this particular story. I guess I will, because you're asking the question. It's like for all of my, especially younger artist friends, my guidance to them usually is to really think hard about what business you're in. And I don't mean the music business, because we're all in the music business, but like, what is your particular business that you're in, the way that you do it, or what is it that people value about what you're doing, or what is it that what's unique to you that people are responding to, and how can you make sure and accentuate that and amplify that and draw attention to that. And for me, there was a point just a few years ago. It was this, I know, was right before the pandemic, and I had a record that was turning 10, I guess. Was it 10 or was it more? Maybe it was 20. Oh God, I don't know anymore. But I've done this for a long time. But it was the Stockholm Syndrome record, and it was turning some birthday, and it was a record that people had responded to. So I thought I could take a chance with material like that for its anniversary. So I thought, well, I would love to play some shows, and maybe just play that material, just play some Stockholm Syndrome kind of anniversary. I'm just going to play my way through the record, and I like doing that with some of the records. I don't do it with all of them when they turn birthdays, but anyways, and I was working on a record that it would go on to be the Targets record. So that was more of a rock record. It was more of a band record, and I don't always do those.
Yeah.
Just every so often I'll do something that's like a band situation. And so I was talking to my manager and talking to somebody who was kind of wanting to help me out with booking. And they were like, okay, if you're telling me you have, like, next year you're going to have this rock record and you're going to want to maybe take a band out, and that means we're going to try to put you in some clubs, and but small clubs. That's what I like 200 cap, 100 cap. Like, that's perfect for me.
Just hit those small cap rooms.
Yes, that's
more intimate.
And so this person really had those small club circuit. He knew that space really, really well. He's like, here's what I need you to do. Like, we can't go in with your next record trying to get them to bring you in. They're not going to know you. I used to play clubs for years. I did in my early solo career for Mockingbird and for Ringing Bell a lot, and for Stockholm Syndrome a lot. Like, played a lot of clubs. And so he's like, what I need you to do is go and do a run in these clubs so I can book you in. Because if it's been more than 5 years since you've been there, they've never heard of you. Like, that means you have no reputation. Unless if it's more than 5 years old, they're not.
Is that because of their audience? Is that because of their talent buyers?
That's more their talent buyers. It's like they are not going to be willing to have you and set it up in any way that you can make any money.
Yeah.
Or they're not going to be willing to promote it. If you haven't been there in at least 5 years, you're just not going to get. It's going to cost you money to do it, probably. They're just not going to get behind it. They're going to do it. They're going to see what happens. You'll get a crappy night. You'll get a crappy slot.
Tuesday.
You'll get a crappy deal. But they'll have you. And if we can go in and you can be really cool with them. And basically he said, your whole job is to go in and meet all the bartenders, meet all the door people, meet the guy running the soundboard, meet the manager, be extremely cool to everybody, so that when I call them back in a year from now, they're like, oh yeah, he was a nice guy. Let's have him back. And let's give him a better slot. And so, like, all this is an investment in next year. If you're telling me you want to go into clubs, I was like, okay, well, I was about to do a house show for this anniversary of Stockholm Syndrome. What if we put that in clubs? Like, I feel good enough about that material that I think maybe people would show up, even if that's not where they're used to coming to see me. And so that seemed like it made sense.
Yeah.
So I was like, great, I'll gamble on that. And that's what we did. So he booked it up, and he was right. Like, the nights were terrible, the slots were terrible. They didn't promote it at all. So it was all on us. The deals were terrible, that I was getting, but it was getting me in those rooms, back in those rooms. And that tour was, I kind of hate that I did it that way, only because the shows got shortchanged, because it just didn't, the tour itself just wound up not going that well, because
I loved the live release from it, though.
Well, thank you. Which I did record at one of the clubs that just happened to multi-track it and gave them to me. I was like, okay, cool. And I listened to it. I was like, it's not the worst. So I had somebody mix it and we released it. But it was pretty awful. Like, most of it was pretty demoralizing. It's one of those, like, okay, at that point, I'm like, I've been doing this for how many decades? And here I am in whatever town playing the 6 o'clock slot on a weeknight, and there are like literally 4 people here, and then the person at the bar and the person at the door and the guy behind the PA. So there's 7 people in the room, and I've been doing this for how long? And it's like it was rough. There were some rough nights, just because it set me all off my rhythm. That's not the way and the place that my people were used, because I've been playing mostly all house shows for years at that point. And that I love. I love that circuit. I love that way that works. And I know how that works. I know how to make that work. But again, this was the investment. But it was awful. I mean, some nights were fantastic. There were a handful of sold out, really fun nights. There were a whole bunch in the middle that were iffy either way. And then there were a small percentage that were just like I described, that were just awful and just really hard work. And I had a lot of time driving around doing that tour, thinking a lot about all of that. Like, what am I doing right now? And it got me thinking about, what business am I in? And why is this or isn't this working for me? And why does it feel this way? And that's when I realized that for me, I mentioned this before, but for me, at least at that time, I was looking at what I'm doing and I was like, what is it that when I'm doing, people seem to respond? And when I'm doing what, does it feel like that's my unique thing that I do? And that I am in, my friend Flamey Grant says, and it's a thing that we've learned from drag performers, like, find a thing that no one else is doing and do that thing, and you're immediately the best at it.
Yeah.
Because you're occupying a genre where only you exist.
I mean, as the saying goes, the riches are in the niches.
Yeah. Or the riches are in the niches, I guess how they must say now. And so as I was thinking about that, driving between these shows that were really hard, I was like, I think I am in, just looking at the way people respond, I think I'm in the intimacy business. I think that's the business I'm in. Because when I'm doing this and trying to do it for a lot of people or trying to scale it in some way, it doesn't work nearly as well, and I don't feel the same way about it as when I'm doing it for a really small group of people. Because, we were talking earlier about how the internet is void of nuance, and large groups, in other words, are void of nuance and critical thinking. And there's a lot of groupthink and big,
social contagion.
Yes, but when you're doing it for a small group of people, there's great fertile ground to have conversations and to disagree and to get really critical, and it's like really fun. And that's what I do and what I love about doing it. And I thought, you know what? That's what's not working about this. Like, this is the opposite of the intimacy business. I'm going into these clubs, I'm asking people to come out into these random places, probably in downtown areas, and park and come in and pay all this money, almost none of which I'm getting. Yeah. And they have to probably buy a couple of drinks and stand in the dark while I stand on that stage with a giant PA and a bunch of lights. I was like, this isn't what I do when I'm really doing what I'm best at. This isn't it. And I came home from that whole thing realizing some changes I needed to make. Because another thing, and I'm so sorry, you didn't know you were going to ask one question, it was going to be the whole episode.
I love it.
But like the other thing I realized was, there's just as I'm thinking about it, another thing that was happening, I was noticing. I thought I was crushing email at that time too. Because in terms of what the conventional wisdom is of how you do email, just make it like big images. You don't have to scroll. Very clear communication, just clear and efficient and
solid hook.
And solid hook and sharp and I thought I was crushing it in terms of what you're supposed to be doing. But I was watching my opens and my clicks and responses just creep down to a drudge. It was just, I was like, and it was during that time I was like, I knew this was going to happen someday, but like, is it over? I feel like maybe it's over. No one's opening my emails. No one's listening. No one cares. No one's coming to the shows. Like, I feel like maybe my career is done. It's not working. Nothing's working.
Hey there, I hope you're loving this episode so far and are getting some really helpful tips to build your career as a live musician. If you're a musician who's new to the live music industry and you're looking for step-by-step assistance to help you book your first paying gigs, then you're going to love my 5-day Garage to Stage crash course. In this free online course, we cover my Perform framework that will tell you everything you need to know to get started booking gigs, including how to start making contacts in the live music industry, how to put together an EPK, how to contact talent buyers, what to do the day of your gig, and how to keep your momentum going after your encore. To sign up, just go to my website at www.bookyourbandpodcast.com and fill out the short registration form. Again, this is a 100% free training But spaces are limited, so sign up today. Thanks so much. Now back to the show.
But I hadn't thought for a while about like, but what business am I in? And so I came home from that whole experience thinking about all that and decided to try some things and make some changes. And this is what I love about failure. You learn everything from failure. You don't learn anything from success other than maybe heaping more expectation and more success on yourself. You don't stop and think about what did I learn back there when you succeed? What worked back there? What didn't? You don't. You just barrel ahead mostly. Failure, you stop and you slow down and you assess and you think and you take stock and you think about like, okay, what am I doing? Why did that happen? How can I make sure that never happens again? You know, that sort of thing. And so I used to do everything I could to avoid success professionally and personally and everything else. And it wreaked havoc on my life. I love failure now. I used to avoid it like the plague. And now I run headlong into it. If I'm like, okay, I think I'm about to fail at this, then let's let that happen. And let me see what I can learn and what I can adapt and change and iterate and do better.
And you learn it's not that scary.
It's not. It's a great thing to learn you're not going to die.
Yeah.
You know, when the worst thing you could ever imagine happens, it's like, oh, I can survive that. Even that's great information. So anyways, I failed spectacularly in my mind at all this. I came home and I was like, okay, if I'm in the intimacy business, I think a few things need to change. One, I need to call my manager and call that booking person and say, I'm never doing this again. I'm not ever I don't want anyone ever to ask me again to change the way I do my live situation. I am going to play house shows forever now. Now, that doesn't mean that some people don't host house shows in other kinds of rooms. Last night in Nashville, our host was like a local progressive church. They wanted me to play in their room, and I was like, fantastic. So I didn't use a PA. That's not to say I don't use PAs sometimes. It's like I go in and use whatever the environment calls for, but at that point I was like, I am only ever going to play shows that are hosted by fans, like people who care, people who are resonating with what I'm doing, who care enough to come into the risk with me and let me come play in their house or their basement or their yoga studio or a coffee shop where they have a friend who runs it and will let us do it or whatever the situation is. I want somebody in it with me like that. And we're going to sell all the tickets ourselves on our website or we're going to do it that way. So that's one thing that's about to change. Don't ever ask me to go into clubs again. And I was like, you know what? I've already started adapting. So I'm putting out a big full band record. I'll do solo electric house shows, which is what I was preparing to do. I was going to come in with an electric guitar and one little speaker and a mic and do a loud version of a house show playing rock music. But it was still going to be in a house. It was still going to be in unconventional venues, off the grid of all the conventional venues in town. You'll never know I was there because that's intimacy. Like I want it to feel special. I want it to be a much smaller group in a much smaller space because that's where I can talk more and we can have conversations and so that was one thing that changed. The second thing that changed was I decided finally to start a Patreon, which I'd never done before. I was aware of that platform from the day Jack started it and always thought it was fascinating, loved it, had no idea what I would do with it. And on the way home from that tour, I was like, oh, now I know exactly what I would do with the I know exactly why I need to do that now, because that's a way of creating a space where the people who are most deeply resonating can come closer, support me in a small subscription way, like a monthly way, and I can make a ton of exclusive stuff just for them so everybody feels like they're getting the better end of the deal. But like, I need that support. So you'll never buy a record of mine again because you're buying it a little tiny bit every single month. And you'll be the first to get it. In fact, you'll get the demos. In fact, you'll get to watch me write it. You know?
Well, that's what I was going to ask is I know with the Jesus Hypothesis album, you did something I've never seen an artist do, which was to write in real time.
I live streamed every songwriting session.
Yeah.
And I literally commented, just talked my way through every melodic decision, every lyrical decision. I was playing songs I was listening to and saying, okay, that part right there, that's the thing I want to be part of this song. And I would just commentate, monologuing to a camera.
So how did you wrap your mind around the process and the idea of songwriting as performance?
Right.
Because normally we look at them as so separate. You go write in a vacuum so that you can come perform.
And that's how I've done it for decades.
Yeah.
And I had no idea if it was going to work. I was just like, I'm going to just chase the momentum of the idea. Because once I had the idea, I was like, well, I just really want to try that. But I have no idea if it's going to work. And because I've never been able to do that. I've never been able to just say, oh, that's why I don't have like a publishing deal in Nashville like some of my friends where, you know, you have like a 10 and a 2 and a 5 o'clock session and you just go write songs just because it's that time of day and you've got an appointment. And you hook up with other professional songwriters. You just write some random song and then maybe somebody records it or something. But like, I've never done that in all my years because a 10 o'clock appointment is not a good enough reason for me to write a song. Like something more has to be happening for me. And so I think the only reason that worked is because I did have an idea of like what I wanted the record to be, which I typically do get early. I get a concept, I get maybe an album title. I get a few song titles of songs I want to be on that record, but I have no idea what the songs are yet. And so I felt strong enough about the idea, the concept, and then I was just like, I don't know. It just feels like it's got momentum. I follow energy. I just follow coordinates. And
it also sounds like you thrive on putting yourself in situations where you have to be vulnerable.
Yes, I do, actually. And that felt to me like it was in line with what I had decided and discovered, which was I'm in the intimacy business. So I think this is going to work. And something about it did. I hit stream and I just started talking. It's all still up. Like anybody who joins my Patreon can actually go. There's a private YouTube unlisted YouTube channel or playlist that you get access to, and you can start in episode 1, and there's like 20 or 40 or something episodes, and they're all an hour or 2 long each, and you can literally watch your way through me writing every word on that record and even record some of it. I hoped to do more of the recording as a live stream, but that didn't work out the same way. It wasn't as easy. But anyways, so I just sat down and tried it, and it just somehow miraculously I was able to do it. And it actually kind of made the record appear faster. It made it more efficient because when I'm doing it and no one knows I'm doing it, then it's like, it's when do I have the time to sit down and write?
Yeah.
Which I'll do 50 things before I'll sit down and write, even when I really need to be writing, you know, when I need to be doing it. But something about saying, well, I've scheduled 5 writing sessions this week in front of patrons, like they're going to show up. So, I mean,
to watch,
at least a dozen people or some are going to show up to watch me do this. I have to keep that appointment. So it was on my calendar. So I did it. And so it made me go and just devote the time, just throw human misery at the songwriting process. And the songs just showed up. I couldn't believe I was able to, genuinely didn't know if I was going to be able to do it. I didn't know if I was going to have to stage that and then go off and actually try to write the songs. It was going to take me twice as long. And it didn't. Yeah. And not only was I able to do it, but I wrote songs I was super proud of. Like
it's a great album.
I feel like I wrote as good as songs as I can write on that record. Like as good as I'm able to do at this point in my career, I think I did. And I managed to do it live streaming, which, you know, but I wasn't interacting. I think that
I remember when you announced that that's how you were going to be doing the album. I was like, I can't imagine, especially because of the content and how heavy it is and how personal it was. You'd be like, hey, come follow along and watch as I self-examine and reconsider my thoughts about
ribs apart,
God and history and politics and everything.
So that was very encouraging. And but there was no interaction.
Yeah,
there was no commenting. I was like, listen. And I said at the beginning of every session, like, if you're on YouTube watching this and you're commenting, I'm not watching that. I don't want to know if you like or don't especially like whatever I'm currently working on, because it'll change a dozen times by the time it's done. So also don't get demoitis and fall in love with some early thing I wrote and then I drastically changed it and you're forever going to wish I'd done it the way you heard me do it at the very beginning, because this is a process.
Yeah.
You know? So anyways, Patreon. The third thing I did coming home from that failed tour was I decided I was getting... think what you want about the comedian Louis C.K. I know he got canceled a few years ago, and apparently is a pretty gross individual. But you know, if you didn't, that would only have been a shocker if you'd never listened to his comedy before, because he talked a lot about how gross he was before that. The point being, what I learned from him was I was on his email list, and he's very indie the way he does what he does, and he'll pay all the money to book and perform and record and film a special, as opposed to taking a crap ton of money from Netflix or something. He does it himself. He does it. And then he would film it, pay for it all. And then he would release it on his website as a download or like a stream for like $5. And he would make like $1 million. And I'm not joking. He would like literally make over $1 million like on PayPal, selling it on his website. Then, and like
Radiohead had to pay what you want.
Yeah, 10 times recoup it. Then he would still license it to Netflix and make a ton more. But and he ran his email list very indie the same way. And I would get these emails from Louis C.K. whenever he had a new special out, and they were like raving serial killer. I mean, it was in every way the opposite of what you're supposed to do.
When you're talking about building your funnels,
he did the opposite.
Out the window.
Exactly the opposite. They were just plain text, like you'd be getting an email from anybody. No pictures, no hyperlinks, no nothing. They were plain text emails, and they were long, and they were rambling, and you didn't even know for a long time why is he even emailing? It was and it literally felt like I was getting and they would come at random times, 2:00 in the morning. All the opposite of all the things you're supposed to do. Like when are you supposed to send emails or whatever? And it felt like I was getting an email from Louis C.K. at 2:30 in the morning. Literally, he was up at 2:30 in the morning writing long, crazy emails and just sent them to like I was a friend of his or something. And damned if I didn't read every word of those emails though. I loved it. It was intimate. I was like, you know what? I'm going to try that. And so I wrote an email basically kind of saying the experience I just had and saying, listen, it's really me on the other side of this. I don't want you to feel like it's some big business or some assistant I've got, or like it's me. Like I'll prove it. Like hit reply, write me back and I'll write you back. Like let's talk.
Well, when we booked the house show that you're playing at my house, like I expected to hear from your team. I didn't expect 20 minutes later to be like, hey, it's Derek. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, I went to my wife. I was like, Derek Webb emailed me.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, we learned early on that like my team wouldn't hear back from anybody unless I chimed in, and they knew it's really me. Like, you know, like it's not. I don't have like I'm not some big business. I'm very indie. And the point being, I sent this long, and I told this long story of everything I just told you about. I was been on this tour, and I didn't know what was going on, and so I'm just gonna start writing my emails myself. No pictures, no nothing, and just to talk. And yes, I'll let you know if I've got stuff going on, but that's how I'm going to do it. And sent that out and literally had the biggest response I'd had in years to an email. Everybody showed back up. They were still there, but I had like a 40%, 50% open rate. And it was crazy. It's a crazy, or no, the open rate was really high and the click-through rate was like something like 50%. It was crazy numbers. I was like, oh, right. I got it now. Like, that's how I need to do this. It's how I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah.
But I need to be upfront about it because that's what people value about what I'm doing. It's better when it's being done in a small group. So even just doing house shows like this, like yes, I love it. It's my favorite way to do it. I've played shows every different way over the last handful of decades. I love playing shows like this because of everything I've just said. It's the center of the bullseye in terms of intimacy and all that stuff. Love that. But also, I make way better money doing it this way. Because if I go play in a club, so we'll have, 35 people maybe here, and that's pretty average, like, between, let's say, 30, 40, 50, 60. Like in Dallas a weekend ago, I had maybe 80 or 100, but that's big. That's bigger for me. But like anywhere from 30 to 50, let's say. If I put 30 or 50 people in a club and they all paid in a club, you're walking up, you're not expected at a club to spend more than 10 or 12 bucks at the door to get into
because they expect you to buy drinks and everything else.
And so that's X amount of dollars by the time, but the club usually wants at least 50% of that, if not way more.
Yeah.
And they want you to recoup them a couple of $100 or $300 worth of expenses of the sound guy and the door guy and the bartender.
And now they're starting to take percentages off of merch.
Which, boy, oh boy, that sucks. But anyways, so like, you can't make any money doing that. Like, even if I put 200 people in a club, it's really hard to make any money at that.
Yeah.
Whereas if I put 30, 40, 50 people in a house where no one's taking any of it from me, we're doing it all directly. Hosting is free, but like a lot of, promoters will pay an artist, guarantee an artist, then they sell tickets, and that's how they recoup back, and that's how they make their money. Artist makes money from a guarantee. Promoter makes money from selling tickets.
Yeah.
The way I do it, hosting is free. We just sell the tickets. If my team and I are smart and we're putting me in places where we think I can actually sell a reasonable amount of tickets, and I'm charging 20, 25 bucks for a ticket because it's supply and demand, it's like a small group in a house with no PA. It's like there's a scarcity thing there too. So people are like, "Whoa, that's an experience."
And I've also heard a lot of artists who do mostly house shows say that they sell more merch in house shows than they do playing mid-cap rooms.
Yes. So it's merch is good. And people are willing to pay a little more because they're going to have an experience. You're not standing in the dark nursing a beer. I wouldn't pay more than $10 for that. Yeah. But it's like, this is a different experience. I don't want to use the word premium, but it's like, it's a more sophisticated, interesting, so it's a super fan experience. It's something that only a handful of people are going to want to do, but I only need a handful of people. So if I can put 30, 40, 50 people, three nights a weekend, 2 weekends a month, which is the way I do it, 6 shows a month, you can do all that math, but that's a decent part of a living there. And that
then
to
you factor
me,
in your Patreon and
yes,
everything else.
and so and it's like I can make a living at it this way. So it's like it's the right thing for so many reasons, and it all comes back to me just thinking about what I'm doing in terms of it being the intimacy business, and and that's why this works, Patreon works, because I'm trying to figure out how do I make a living scaling this, not scaling it up, scaling it down. How do I make money enough to survive doing this for and to as few people as possible? How do I make a living at this with as few fans as possible? And so that makes you think that way about it. It's like, well, what do people most resonate with that I do? Well, they probably want to hear me talk a bunch. Well, you can't do that in a club. It just doesn't work there. Through a big microphone. This environment, it's fantastic, and people can chime in. And
we want to hear this story.
Yeah, but you can do that here. It's different. And Patreon, it's like exclusive stuff for a microcosm of people. And it weirdly does come back to funnels, though. And that's how my mind works. It's like the internet is the funnel. Spotify is the top of the funnel. Twitter is the top of the funnel. Social media is the top of the funnel. That's where everybody is. And then you're slowly bringing people down into experiences that they're willing to come down and get into with you and maybe pay you. And down at the very, very sharp tip of the very bottom of it is like house shows and Patreon and things that hardly anybody is going to want to do. It's a tiny percentage of the top of the funnel who wants to do that, but I only need a tiny percentage to make a decent living at it. And that's what I figured out. And so that's what I'm constantly thinking about and trying to figure out how to make more efficient all the time. And so that's why I'll come through your town and you'll never hear about it, but I'm still making a living.
Yeah.
And that's why 30 years in, I'm like the Bilbo Baggins of indie music, because I've been doing this for so long. And it's not because it's for sure not because I'm remotely the most talented of all my friends. Not by a lot. I'm the least probably talented of all my friends, many of whom do not make a living at this. Yeah. I've made a living for decades at this, not by being the most talented, but by being the most adaptable. And just thinking critically about exactly what business am I in, which also changes year to year. And I have to I rethink that constantly. I'm constantly thinking about how to tweak this thing and how to make sure that the people who really deeply resonate and value what I'm doing, resonate with and value what I'm doing, that I'm doing it for them directly and giving them a direct access point to me if that's what they want. And in every way that I can, be it house shows or Patreon or email or however you'll engage with me, I'm going to make sure to give you those opportunities to support me in direct measure with how whatever I'm doing might be impacting you and resonating with you.
So that's actually a great transition. Should my listeners want to, and trust me, if you've never heard Derek, he's on my Mount Rushmore of songwriters. But
that does not mean that what I'm doing is for you.
Yes, it may not be.
Because what I do is for hardly anybody. Yeah. And it's remarkable that I can make a living.
But if they want to learn more about your Patreon, learn more about your house shows, learn about hosting a show, learn about we didn't get a chance to get into it, but you have an online course called Middle Class Musicians.
Yeah.
Where can they find you online?
DerekWebb.com. I work hard at making sure that there is one place you can go and everything is clearly prioritized. There will be a clear opportunity to learn about what I'm doing on Patreon. There's a clear opportunity to see where I'm playing and to learn about how to host me, all of which is streamlined as possible. So yeah, just DerekWebb.com, DerekWebb, and I'm at Derek Webb everywhere.
Excellent. Well, we'll be sure to put that in the show notes. I know you've got to start getting ready for a show.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Derek.
It's a pleasure.
Dream come true.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Book Your Band podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I would sincerely appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button and share the show with some of your friends. To stay informed on upcoming episodes, be sure to sign up for the Book Your Band mailing list and also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. All those links are available at www.bookyourbandpodcast.com.